So when you picture the Vietnam War, what do you hear? For a lot of us, it's probably the thump 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 of helicopter blades mixed with the sound of a searing rock and roll guitar solo. That sound, it's fused with the images of the war, right? Well, that's not just a coincidence. Music was literally woven into the fabric of a soldier's day-to-day life.
You gotta understand, rock was so much more than just background noise. It was a lifeline. Imagine you're in a place that's totally alien and honestly terrifying. Music was this little piece of home you could hold on to. It became a shared language that connected these young GIs in Vietnam with everyone back in the States. The very same songs blasting from car radios on the coast of California were also echoing through the jungles of Southeast Asia.
And this connection was absolutely everywhere. I mean, from the Mekong Delta all the way to the DMZ, soldiers were carrying around portable radios and tape recorders. You had the American Forces Vietnam Network, the AFVN, broadcasting the top 40 24/7, kicking off every morning with that iconic Good Morning Vietnam. They even had live Filipino rock bands playing gigs just behind the front lines. And of course, every new group of soldiers brought a fresh stack of records from home, so the soundtrack was always up to date.
But here's where the story takes a really dark turn. There's another side to this soundtrack, a side that twisted music from something that gives comfort into a tool of pure fear. So what happens when the music you love, the sound of your entire generation, gets turned into a weapon? This is where we get into the world of psychological warfare, or PSYOPs. The US military started experimenting with sound as a weapon. The goal? To completely shatter the enemy's morale, to create fear and chaos and confusion, all without firing a single shot. And let me tell you, their methods were, well, they were disturbingly creative. One of the most famous, and frankly, one of the most chilling examples of this, was a mission from 1969 called Operation Wandering Soul. And this operation, it didn't use rock music. It used something way more personal and way more terrifying. To get this, you have to understand a really deep-seated Vietnamese cultural belief. The tradition says that it is absolutely crucial for the dead to be buried properly in their homeland. If they're not, their spirits are doomed to become wandering souls, lost in an agony for eternity. The US military learned about this and decided to weaponize it. The plan was as simple as it was unnerving. They strapped huge loudspeakers onto Huey helicopters. And then, in the pitch black of night, they'd fly low over Vietcong positions, blasting these custom-made recordings. But these weren't songs. They were these horrifying, ghostly sounds. Wails, spooky whispers, the supposed voices of fallen soldiers, the wandering souls calling out to their friends from the afterlife. And the craziest part? It worked. I mean, just try to imagine it. You're deep in the jungle, it's completely dark, and all of a sudden the air is filled with these terrifying voices. The psychological impact was immense. The sounds caused so much panic that some Vietcong units would just start firing blindly into the dark. Or sometimes they'd just drop everything and abandon their positions completely. But it wasn't just ghost sounds echoing through the jungle. The PSYOPs teams also turned their attention to the very same music the American GIs loved, rock and roll. The same songs that brought comfort to US troops were about to be used for a very, very different purpose. The tactic was basically a pure sonic assault. We're talking about artists like Jimi Hendrix, just blasted from those same helicopter speakers at volumes over 100 decibels. The point wasn't to entertain anybody, it was to disrupt everything, to stop people from sleeping, to make it impossible to communicate, and just to create this constant, nerve-shredding wall of noise designed to wear down the enemy's will to fight. But the Americans weren't the only ones playing these kinds of sonic games. Oh no. North Vietnam had its own PSYOPs program, and they also used American rock music, but they did it in a much more subtle, almost more insidious way. So GIs would be tuning their radios, and they'd often stumble upon this English-language broadcast coming from Radio Hanoi. The host was a woman they all nicknamed Hanoi Hannah. You could think of her as a different kind of ghost, one that spoke directly to American soldiers in their own language, using their own culture as a weapon against them. Her strategy was pretty brilliant, really. She wouldn't just hit you over the head with propaganda. First, she'd draw you in with something familiar. She would play the biggest hits of the day, Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Beatles, Aretha Franklin. She played the exact songs they were homesick for. And then, once she had their attention, that's when she'd slip in her demoralizing messages.
In this really calm, smooth voice, she'd talk about the anti-war protests happening back home, she'd read the names of American soldiers who had just been killed, and she'd plant these little seeds of doubt. She'd say things like, "Your sweetheart isn't waiting for you at home. This war is pointless." It was psychological warfare aimed straight for the heart. So what you end up with is this really fascinating kind of twisted parallel. On one side, the US is using loud rock and ghost sounds as a blunt instrument to create fear and chaos. On the other side, Hanoi Hannah is using that same familiar music like a scalpel, making these precision strikes to create doubt and homesickness. Rock music had officially become a weapon for both sides in a full-on psychological and cultural war. So with all this sound being weaponized, from ghosts in the jungle to propaganda on the radio, what did this mean for the average soldier? Well, it meant that his own personal soundtrack became more important than ever. Listening to your favorite song on a little portable radio suddenly wasn't just about passing the time. It became an act of psychological self-defense. It was like a rock antidote that could drown out the fear, the propaganda, and all the chaos. For just 3 minutes, a song could pull a soldier right out of the jungle and put him back in a world that actually made sense. And these tactics that were pioneered in the jungles of Vietnam, they didn't just disappear when the war ended. In fact, using music and sound as a weapon of war became a pretty standard part of the modern military playbook. You can draw a straight line from then to now. In 1989, the US military famously blasted loud rock music for days to drive Panamanian General Manuel Noriega out of his compound. And in the 2000s, during the conflicts in the Middle East, troops used heavy metal and rock music to intimidate and disorient insurgents. That echo of Operation Wandering Soul, you can still hear it today. So all of this leaves us with a fascinating, kind of dark question. From terrifying whispers to demoralizing pop hits, we've seen how powerful sound can be. So what about today? If you had to choose one song, what do you think would be the most effective psychological weapon? Let us know what you think in the comments below. I'm actually really curious to see what you all come up with. Thanks for watching this explainer. If you found this story as interesting as we did, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.